Hi everybody, it's Chris, and on this episode we're going to talk about aperture. So in simple terms, an aperture is just a hole. It's the opening in your lens through which the light travels to get to the sensor. In most cases the aperture is adjustable. Obviously on action cameras, cell phones, cheaper cameras it's not, but on a reasonable camera you'll be able to adjust the aperture, and if you can adjust it, you can take advantage of it. Being photographers, we have to measure things because that's the nature of the beast. And the aperture is measured in things called f-stops. F-stops are simply the ratio between the focal length of the lens and the diameter of the hole through which the light is traveling. Here's a lens. It has a focal length of 200 millimeters. If the diameter of the aperture is 20 millimeters, then it will have an f-stop of 10. It's 200 divided by 20 gives you 10. So now for the easy explanation. On your camera, you can adjust the size of the aperture, and it works very much like your eye. When it's very, very bright, you'd have a small aperture. And when it's very, very dark, you'd have a large aperture. Okay, where it can get confusing, particularly for beginners, is that most people would imagine that the f-stop number would increase in size with the size of the hole. So you'd imagine that a large hole in the lens aperture would actually be a large number. So the bigger the hole, you'd imagine would be f22, but it's not, it's the opposite. So the trick to remembering the aperture size is to remember that it's always the opposite. A large aperture is a small number. A small aperture is a large number. f22 would be a very small hole, f2.8 would be a very large hole. So why is all of this important? Well, creatively, your aperture can do marvelous things for you. So one of the funky things you can do with your aperture is you can change the depth of field of your photographs. And you will have seen this in a lot of photographs where one small little part of the photograph is in focus and everything else is blurred. Or with a landscape, for instance, where you'd want most of the image to be in focus. And all of that is done with the aperture. If you have a large hole in your aperture, you're going to get lots of light coming in and you're going to have a very shallow depth of field. And if you have a very small hole in your aperture, very little light's going to get in, so you're going to have longer exposures and more of the picture is going to be in focus. And that's it. Now hopefully you know a little bit more about aperture, and hopefully you're still awake. Please don't forget to leave any suggestions for topics, any questions, any comments in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you next time for an episode all about the exposure triangle.